Hello and welcome to Newsclick. We are very glad to have with us today economist and journalist Harish Damodaran, author of the highly regarded work India's New Capitalists: Caste, Business and Industry in a Modern Nation, which, if I can put it like that, is an account of the making of the Indian business class. Welcome to Newsclick, Harish.
Thanks.
As against earlier histories, which focus largely on the contribution of the traditional merchant classes of India in the founding of Indian industry, particularly in the pre-independence era, your book seeks to bring out the contribution of other castes, of Brahmins, the peasant castes, in what you describe as against the earlier scenario of the merchants to industry, the office to industry, and the farm to factory scenarios. And you also see this phenomenon as taking place more in southern and western India than in the north and in the east. Would you care to elaborate a little bit on this?
Yeah, I think a lot of this has had to do with the evolution of the middle class. See, the capitalists are mostly recruited from the middle class, and in our traditional the middle class was largely drawn from the Savarnas, the upper castes. Okay, and on the other hand, business was actually a sort of some kind of an occupational silo within the Chaturvarna system. So therefore, the businessmen were largely Vaishyas. They were basically Baniyas. So much so that Baniya was a sort of a generic term. It referred to the village shopkeeper, the grocer, anybody. Okay. Then what we have seen is the second stage, where you get it, you start, the capitalists start getting recruited from what we call as the urban middle class. And this urban middle class has always been basically people who have been in the professions, who have been bureaucrats, lawyers, accountants, and they have basically come from these particular communities. And then I call the rural middle class, who are basically, say, farmers, who are basically communities like the Kammas, the Gaundars, the Reddys and all these things. So you have the urban middle class and the rural middle class. In the south and in the west, actually what has happened is the middle class, the middle class is much more heterogeneous. They are drawn from a variety of castes. And that probably had to do with whatever, some kind of a forced mandalization, mandalization before Mandal, which happened, and maybe that was because you had reservations very early, in the 1920s, 1930s, and part of it was because it was very easy because Brahmins dominated the professions, the bureaucracy. If you go to Maharashtra, the government officials or judges were mostly Chitpavan Brahmins. Right. And same thing in the south, the Brahmins dominated. I think about 2/3 of the graduates in Madras presidency and from Madras University were Brahmins.
Would you also see this as a consequence of the somewhat earlier development of what you would call capitalism in the southern states as against the northern states?
The South was not such a developed capitalist center
from an industry point of view.
You cannot say that because you look at what was Bombay. Yeah. You see the West till 1947 was largely, the business was largely controlled by Baniyas or Parsis. You see, for example, a community like the Marathas, you didn't have a single Maratha industrialist pre 1947. Then they enter into it. The Patels, same thing. The emergence of the Patels is a post-1947 development. So I don't think it has to do with the fact that industry is more developed in an area or not developed.
Some reviewers of your work have pointed to the fact that in the post-independence era, particularly in the post-Green Revolution era, you've had a new class of what some people have called a contractor class. Yes. Who have risen, that perhaps your work had not fully taken into account this phenomenon. Do you see this as a gap, or do you see the rise of the contractor class as one more expression of the rise of the rural middle classes turning their money into other ventures?
No, I don't think so. Like, for example, tell me, you look at the northern contractors. Who are the big contractors? JP. Uh, JP is a Brahmin. You don't find any large contractors who are either Jats or who are Gujars or Yadavs or Kurmis. Whereas in the south, for example, the best example is you look at the construction sector. Lanco, it's a Kamma. Soma Enterprises, Navayuga Enterprises, Progressive Construction. These are all Kammas, and they all came up in the 70s. So the thing is, whenever, because of in post-independence India, you had a lot of public sector investment. So that creates a lot of subcontracting opportunities. Right. So the thing is, who are the people who exploit that? In what we are seeing in the south is that you find new people coming and exploiting that.
There's some reviews I read of your book which in fact said this is perhaps something that you could look at subsequently, that your classification is of firms which are of 1,000 crores and more, and that you may therefore have left out some of these trends governing smaller enterprises where you might see something slightly different.
See, I would say that the people who are big today are the ones who were small at one point of time. So if the small people don't become big, that means there is a problem. You like a classic example are the Ramgadiya Sikhs. Okay, the Ramgadiya community, they own many foundries. They are very good. They're very good in tool shops. This thing, but they have not gone beyond that stage. Okay, whereas you look at the Gaundars. Or you look at the Gaundars. Gaundars started off as ordinary. Actually, they started as workers. Right. These are actually yes, as petty subcontractors. And from there, they become even textile barons. Right. See, so why is it? So I would call the Gounder community a very dynamic community.
Sure. Do you see the rise of this class of crony capitalists, fixers, as a phenomenon in the constitution of the Indian business class, which would see the beginnings of the transcendence of caste?
See, what is crony capitalism? Crony capitalist is somebody who seizes opportunities thrown up by the state. Yes. You take, for example, Maruti. Okay, Maruti came up in 1980s. You see all the subcontractors. They're all Khatris. Sona Koyo Steering, Omax Autos. So it is interesting that the subcontractors all are basically the Punjabi Khatris. And who are the Punjabi Khatris? Pre-partition, they were all in Lahore, Rawalpindi, they were in West Punjab. They come to Delhi, and then because of Delhi's strategic location, administrative center, then they get into very big, very large-scale business. So Maruti typifies a case. Now, would you call it crony capitalism? In some ways, yes. Any capitalist venture, there is a primitive accumulation, and that comes obviously through your contacts. What is this entire movement in Telangana? It is basically about one set of small-time contractors, small-time educationists who want to go into the next league.
Some ideologues of the Sangh Parivar, like Gurumurthy, for example, have argued that caste as an institution should in fact be seen in a positive light because of the contribution of caste solidarities to the rise of business classes like in Tirupur or other examples that you have cited. And in fact, he cites your work in support of his argument. So given this argument that I was just talking about of the role of dominant castes, should one at all be thinking in terms of positive and negative outlooks regarding caste, or see this as part of historical phenomena?
I think that's how any historian would be inclined to. That is the position he should take. But definitely caste solidarities have their role. Like for example, the Iravas, the Nadars. These were very extremely backward communities. They were what is it called? They were just short of untouchables. Right. But they didn't have. They could not access temples. They could not access public wells. Sure. So they created their own associations and they promoted the thing. So one should give them the credit for that. There's no, but it's not a question of seeing it positively or negatively. One doesn't say that, that should be the way of it. But yes, they have achieved something. One should give it to them. And probably the success would come when they transcend the caste loyalties, when they start behaving more like capitalists rather than, And that's how it should be eventually. I think finally, the problem in India has always been that class and caste have been, more or less going together. Whereas this thing should break. This caste, the occupational, the caste should cease to be an occupational this thing. It's a good thing that we hardly see any Iravas or Nadars who are into toddy tapping these days.
You think the formation of a Indian business class would really come into its own?
And it is happening. I think hopefully over a period of time. Now that is not, it is still being dominated by certain communities. Yes, that is the case. Thank you.